Hello everyone, welcome to Dundas dashboard how-to videos. This video will show you how you can set up and use the small multiple control to display your data. A small multiple is a series or a grid of similar visualizations that allow you to compare them easily by displaying multiple instances of the child controls in a linear or a grid arrangement. For example, on your screen you can see the departmental expenses per region report. To the right you can see the report displayed in a data grid control, and to your left you can see the same data being displayed in a small multiples control. In this example, the visualization used within the control is a data label which displays the expenses data inside the small multiple for each region and each department. This allows for easy comparison between the data and allows for quick analysis. Here we have a couple of more examples. To your left you can see the same data being displayed in the small multiple using a display indicator, and since our KPI has state groups defined, the KPI states are automatically getting displayed in the display indicator in the form of the colors that you see. To your right you can see the same data being displayed using a state indicator control, and once again the KPI states come into play and color the state indicator according to the state conditions specified in the KPI. And here's one more example. This time we're displaying the data using a bar chart control and displaying the regions. So instead of a bar chart you can also use a line chart or any other form of charts or graphs to display your data. Here I have displayed it vertically. You can also display it horizontally, or you can also create a matrix of these graphs. In the example that you're going to see, we're going to use a data label inside a small multiples control, but as you saw, you can use any control that you want to display the data inside the small multiples. So let's see how to set up the small multiples control. So as you can see on your screen, I have an empty dashboard canvas with a text label with the name departmental expenses per region, and we're going to set up the small multiples control on this canvas. But before seeing the steps on how to set up the control, let's see how the KPI is set up. So go to Design Explorer and KPI. Our KPI is called departmental expenses per region. Let's edit this. I've got one measure called expenses, and I've got two dimensions, one for region and the other called department name. I have a state group with 3 states, and let's add a sorting rule according to the region. And once I preview, you can see that the data is displayed sorted according to the region. Save it and check in. So once you're set with the KPI, let's proceed to design the dashboard. So to set up the small multiples control, in the toolbox, go to the small multiples control, click on it and drag it onto the canvas. Once you do this, go to the KPI and drag it on to the small multiples control, click on next. In this step you will be setting the data binding for the small multiples control and associate the row and the column dimension fields with the available dimensions to create rows and columns within the control. So let me give you a brief on all of these sections. So for every unique dimension member in the row dimension, a row of cells would be generated in the small multiples control. If only one row dimension is bound to the data, a single column of cells would be generated which extends vertically downward. For every unique dimension member in the column dimension, a column of cells would be generated in the small multiples control, and if only one column dimension is bound, a single row of cells would be generated which extends horizontally from left to right. If both the row and the column dimensions are bound to the data, a rectangular grid of cells would be generated where each cell corresponds to a unique row or column dimension member pair. This is what we saw in the example previously. The color dimension is used to set the background color of each cell of the small multiple according to the metric value that it is bound to. The metric option is used to bind the metric field from your KPI or dataset to assign a single numeric value to each cell of the control. These numeric values are used for cell sorting and also for coloring the cells based on the state group coloring rules. And if the KPI or dataset has any state groups defined, then they'll be listed here. So let's set each of these up. In the row dimension, by default it's selected as region. In this example, we'll select the department name for the rows and the region for the columns. For this example, we won't be setting the color dimension, but if you want, you can select it from the drop down. So the metric would be expenses. If there are more than one metrics, then you can select them from this drop down. Since we have a state group defined in the KPI, the state group is selected by default. If you had multiple state groups, then you can select them from the drop down. So in the bottom half of the data binding step, you can see that there is a list of the child control types, which you can bind to the KPI by clicking on the corresponding checkbox. This corresponds to the contents of the cell children collection property of the control. This is initially empty but is now automatically populated with one item based on the preferred visualization of the KPI or dataset. If you don't have any preferred visualization specified, then the default chart type is listed instead. So here we have the bar chart child listed as the options. If you want to use another control such as a gauge control instead of a bar chart, then just click Finish to close the binding wizard and add a child control from the toolbox. In this example, we're not going to select the bar chart as the visualization, and we're going to set up the data label as the child visualization. So let's just click on Finish, and since we want a data label, click on the data label control from the toolbox and drag it onto the small multiples control. Then you can see that the cell children has been added with one bar chart child and the other for data label child. You can delete the bar chart child if you don't want, but for now let's keep it. The next step is to bind the data label to the small multiples control and the corresponding KPI. So for that, click on data information and click on the KPI, click on next, and here you can see that the data label child has been added as one of the options to select from the child data visualization control. So go ahead and select the data label, which opens the data settings configuration wizard, and in this select the metric that you want to display on the data label and click on Finish. Once you're set, click on Finish. Before doing that, if you had selected any other control such as a radial gauge, it would have appeared here instead of a data label, and the setup would have been the same. The data binding setup would be similar to a regular radial gauge control. So once you're all set, click on Finish, and just for reference, let's add a data grid to the side. Let's get rid of the group description, and since we're all set, let's preview it. So as you can see, the small multiple control has been set up and the data from the KPI has been populated in each of its cells. For reference, the data grid has been set up to your right, and like I mentioned previously, we've used a data label to display the data here, but if you want, you can use any other control such as a radial gauge or a linear gauge, etc. And if you had set up the color dimension, then it would have colored the background of each of these cells according to the metric value. For more information on how to use the small multiples control, including additional property settings as well as additional examples, please visit our support site to the pages that you see on your screen. If you have any questions, please visit our support site at support.dundas.com or contact Dundas support using the contact information shown on your screen. Thank you for watching.